In the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives us the Lord's Prayer, and as he draws it to a close, he makes a comment on one of the lines, and it has to do with forgiveness. He says that if we do not forgive others, we will not be forgiven ourselves. It's a pretty alarming statement, actually. In other words, there is something for which we cannot be forgiven. But if we take that statement as a conditional proposition, and in logic, conditional propositions have logical equivalents, and so if we make that its logical equivalent, which goes from if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven, the equivalent statement is if you are forgiven, then you will forgive. I think that's really the point of what Jesus is saying, and it is that once we are forgiven, once we accept the forgiveness of Jesus and of God and enter into the family, we are prompted, we must forgive. We cannot not forgive. That the indwelling of the Spirit compels us to forgive. And so this becomes a litmus test not for other people necessarily. We're not certainly supposed to judge others in terms of their eternal salvation, but certainly something that we need to take seriously, that we need to be asking ourselves about. Are we people of forgiveness? If we are claiming Jesus, if we claim to be Christians, then we must be people of forgiveness. We must not be holding on to grudges or hurts or scars that we carry in a way that is unforgiving. And this is hard. This is really hard. As people, we certainly have a right. We have a right to be hurt. We have a right to not forgive people, we think. But when it comes to Jesus, we give up our rights. We have responsibilities, and it is incumbent upon us to forgive. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we people of forgiveness? If we're not, if you ask that question, when I ask that question of myself, if the answer to me is yes, there are areas that I have failed to forgive, well, then I have to be honest with myself and say, well, then maybe I have not fully stepped into the forgiveness that I have been offered, or maybe I have not realized it, or at the very least I have work to do. And so the challenge for all of us is to ask that question of ourselves, to ask God to show us the ways in which we fail to forgive so that we might become like Jesus, that we might become the people of forgiveness who in turn receive the forgiveness of God.